All right, so let us carry on with the topic of sleep disorders. I think there's about 2 slides here on sleep disorders, and for our purposes, I'm just interested that you understand that you know what the basic ones are. Well, yeah, that you know what the most common sleep disorders are, and have a sense as to, how dangerous they are, I guess. So obviously the first most common one would be insomnia, and insomnia is defined as, well, it's also useful to know if what you're experiencing is normal or not. But insomnia is defined as the inability to fall asleep, to stay asleep, or waking up really, really early. And their data suggests that everybody at some point, this is considered the most common sleep disorder, everybody at some point experiences this phenomena. The assignment that I have synced up with this chapter, or one of them, is really about your sleep hygiene. And the idea is that one of the causes, or one of the ways that we can reduce our experiences with insomnia, is by improving our environment. In this case, sleep hygiene does not mean that your sheets are clean and you're wearing clean pajamas. I did have a student tell me that one time. That's not what we're referring to, but it is that health-based routine, right? Do you have a pattern? And it kind of works like this. It's a little bit like when we were talking about Pavlov and his dog, and little Watson and Albert. It's that because sleep is a physiological shift in the way that our neurology is working, that the routine that we create to prepare for bed prepares our body too. It's like, I don't want to say it's like priming the pump, but it's like stretching before you work out, or stretching before you work out, or I don't know. But it's this phenomena that is, or stimulus control. It's the behaviors that we do. It's kind of what happens when we're addicted to something. It's the behaviors that we do that tell our neurology, oh yeah, next we're going to go to sleep. So if you have a routine, and one of the first recommendations is that you go to get up. It's you get up the same time every day. That's right. It's you get out of bed the same time every day. But do you go through a series of steps? Do you take a shower? Do you read? And you should avoid screens, especially blue screens, like your sleep space. Oh my gosh, I meant to cover all of these, but your sleep space should be cool as opposed to warm. It should be like it doesn't need to be silent. A lot of people think that it needs to be silent, but a certain kind of sound wave, like in my house as well as in my office, right over there actually, I have a white noise machine. This works a lot like noise canceling headphones do, is it creates a certain wavelength, sound wavelength, that blocks out other sounds. So a lot of people will use a fan, and a fan is certainly a kind of white noise. But with these machines, you can actually influence the pitch. But it's the idea that it blocks out TVs and voices and other things. I often use them in a therapist's office too. Let's see. So a certain kind of sound, cooler as opposed to warmer, darker, and the worst kind of lights are blue lights and red lights. So if you have like a TV screen, you should avoid computers and cell phones in your sleep space. Keep your cell phones in the other room. If you have an alarm clock, turn it around, right? Actually, alarm clocks, what do they call them? Digital alarm clocks, where you can see them, are some of the worst for insomniacs, because what happens is, like what happened to me last night, I woke up at 5 o'clock to let my dogs out, and then when I went back to bed, I'm like, oh no, I only have 45 more minutes. And you look at your clock and you're still awake, and that creates anxiety, and that keeps it harder to go to sleep. So that's all I'm going to, that won't be all I say about that. So, but basically, and these are conventional, for sort of like places to start. Certainly some people have far more medical issues that make it difficult for them to sleep. Avoid caffeine, right? Some people can have no caffeine. I used to be able to drink caffeine up until 5 o'clock and go to sleep just fine. Can't do that anymore, not after noon. Even exercise too close to bedtime can make it difficult to fall asleep. Sometimes even taking a warm shower because that makes you hot, right? Okay, sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is considered a sleep disorder where you effectively stop breathing. CPAP machines are a way that people treat sleep apnea. A lot, my husband has sleep apnea, but he denies it. It's when you stop breathing and you basically, carbon dioxide builds up and you wake up coughing. He's also a smoker, so that makes it worse. But, you know, he's woken himself up where he clearly couldn't breathe. And so what happens is you are waking yourself up like as many as 30, 40 times, even in a few minutes. I don't want to say a minute, but I have heard of like almost, you know, like several times an hour where you wake yourself up. It says it's most common amongst older white men. I don't know if that data is still true or not. It's because it's increasing. And then what the CPAP machines do is they force air in and it spreads out the trachea so that it's easier to breathe. So it's a structural thing. It addresses your inability to get oxygen through changing the structure in your trachea. Narcolepsy. Let me tell you about my experience with narcolepsy. Many years ago when I was first teaching, I had a student during a summer class, and he would fall asleep all the time in class. He'd sat on the side of the room, and he'd fall asleep with his head against the wall. This happened so many times. I mean, it was really frustrating as a teacher. And I would do everything I could to keep this guy from falling asleep. You know, I'd talk, stand in front of him, blah, blah, blah. About halfway through the semester, he says to me, he was kind of happy about it. He's like, I just got a diagnosis of narcolepsy. Narcolepsy, which made me actually feel better because it wasn't me, but it is a sudden, profound sense of sleepiness. And sometimes people can experience a cataplexy. That's a word right there. And a cataplexy would be that they just like, they can literally just fall down, like, or you know, I'll be sitting here working on all of a sudden I'm asleep like that. That'd be a cataplexy. Very dangerous when you're driving. Imagine being an over-the-road truck driver and you having, you know, suddenly falling asleep. Yeah, so, you know, and here's the thing about when you're tired enough, your body will shut down. You cannot fight against it. We can attempt to fight against it, but at some point when our bodies are tired enough, our brains will shut down. You know, things like caffeine and sticking your head out the car. This is why the most accidents, oh, I should find that too, right? The research on car accidents, our most dangerous accidents happen between like 2 o'clock and 5 o'clock in the morning, right? You remember that circadian rhythm thing? And, you know, you may be just fine, but it's the other drivers that may not be just fine, right? I always think about that now. I used to drive, when I was a young person, I drove all the time. We drive straight through. We drive for 25 hours at a time. No way I would do that now. Okay, a couple others here. You have night terrors or sleep terrors. I think these are called terrors because they're much more common in children. I want to say 4 to maybe 10, right? And this is when a kid suddenly sits up and yells, or maybe they don't even sit up, but they yell like, ah! You know, and then mom and dad come running in and the kid lays back down, falls asleep, and doesn't remember it, right? Thing about these parasomnias. So they're called parasomnias because they're like insomnia, and these are disorders of physical arousal. So these are things that are not uncommon, but they shouldn't be happening. Right, when we transition from that light stage of sleep, when our bodies are still able to move, into the deeper stage of sleep, when our body is paralyzed, and then when we transition back out from the paralyzed state to the more alert state, that's when these things are going to happen. And it's not supposed to. There's not supposed to be this overlap. So when we're going through times in our life of profound neurological development, like childhood, or we're under a lot of stress and our brain's not quite, you know, there's just a lot of demands on the hardware, so to the software, so to speak. That's when we start to see some of these disorders or some of these experiences. So like this night terrors one, happens to kids when they're going through a certain developmental stage. Sleepwalking is kind of the same thing. This happens, more common to happen when people are stressed, but it's more common in children than it is in adults. And if you'll notice right there, it's that deepest stage of sleep when your bodies are not supposed to be moving, but for some reason yours is, right? Because everything is growing and developing and it's kind of out of sync at different times. My husband tells a story about his brother was a sleepwalker, and he used to walk to the trash can and pee in the trash can, I guess. A lot of people, I don't recall no, I don't recall being a sleepwalker. But I remember when I was at Girl Scout camp, you know, some of my peers out there would be sleepwalkers. Sleep eating disorder. This is considered, it's kind of a form of sleepwalking. I think in this parasomnia video that I'll make available to you and ask you to watch it and answer a couple questions about it. That's one of the individuals, that's one of the conditions that they're studying there. The sleep eating disorder thing is when people basically they eat in their sleep, and they eat in ways, or they eat foods that they wouldn't normally eat. That's why we call it disordered. So there's instances of people like buttering cigarettes and eating cat food. I have a funny story about that one too. So when my son would have been about sleepwalking age, I don't know if you remember, you could buy these cookies at this holiday seasons, and then all you do is slice them, and they've got, like, you know, Christmas trees or something. Used to buy those all the time. And I found one, and he'd bitten a bite out of it, like he took it out of the tube and he'd eaten out of it. And that would be a typical sleep eating disorder. He would never have eaten that during his wakeful state, but when he was asleep, you know, he'd eat all kinds of weird things. Oh, the one time I remember my husband, that's the funnier one. He used to make these peanut butter balls and honey, and he would mix them up together, and that would be a snack. Well, one time he told me he'd woken himself up in the middle of the night. He'd made peanut butter balls, but instead of using honey, he used olive oil, and I guess it tasted really bad, and that's what woke him up. See, that's what happens when you're sleep deprived. Okay, and then REM sleep behavior disorder. This is basically when you're acting out your dreams. That's sort of a collective, a generic term. No, there's a story about this dude who has a REM sleep behavior disorder, that is because you're not supposed to be able to move during your dreams. Researchers have done experiments with cats where they basically magnetize a certain part of their brain, and they've demonstrated how you can make this happen, or what part of the brain is not working appropriately that would enable a person to act out their dreams. In some, and I think it's mentioned in this video, and in some textbooks, but not in all, there's a phenomenon called sleep sex disorder, and it's where people engage in sexual activity, and what makes during their sleep, and what makes it quote unquote disordered is that it is not, these are behaviors that you wouldn't normally do. This is a kind of sexual behavior that if you were awake, you would not engage in this behavior. So in this video, I think they tell a story about, yes, and they tell a story about someone who was accused of rape, and that was his defense. And then there's another story about a man who stabs his wife, like, I forget, 16 times or something, maybe it's 64 times. And then he uses that it was a parasomnia, that it was a sleep disorder, and that was his defense. I'm going to stop it there. And the next one, we will talk about dreams.